Homesteads and Homeschools is part of the Liberty Hippie Podcast Network. If you like what we do, be sure to check out This Week in Liberpods, Peace Freaks, Cannabis Heals Me, and Free Market's Green Earth. We're living proof that libertarian doesn't mean washed up Republican.
Hey. Bum, ba-dum, bum, bum. Welcome back, people. This is Homesteads and Homeschools, the podcast, and I am your host, the Liberty Hippie, here with you for week number 86. We're rocking and rolling, getting closer to 100 every week. Actually, I think today is the 100th episode. Maybe it was last week. I don't remember. But either way, my guest today is Sean Dembrosky. He's upstate western sort of New York, and he has a lot to say, a lot of good stuff to say about permaculture and food forests. And we had a pretty good discussion about that and just some things to think about when you're driving around, when you're walking through the woods, when you're paying attention to your natural surroundings and seeing what nature has to offer and trying to mimic that, and how those systems can fare better than what we want nature to do, right? Sometimes it works better to do what is sort of already in place than force your will on something else. Sean's a YouTuber. He's at a website and a nursery. I'll put all those links in the show notes, and I will tell you now so you can remember. It's Edile Acres. So it's edileacres.org, and you can find him on YouTube as well. Like I said, that's about it for now. We're going to get going right into this. So let's go plant those seeds of liberty with my guest, Mr. Sean Dembrosky. Today, my guest is Mr. Sean Dembrosky from. Did I say that right, Sean?
Yes.
We just talked about it, but I it's early and I likely messed it up. But so Sean is from a wonderful little place called Edile Acres. Because some of you might be familiar with him over on YouTube. He had a pretty prolific YouTube there, but. Yeah, I wanted Sean to come on today and tell us about his setup, but I think he's got some interesting ideas on the permaculture side, on the edible perennial side, the food forest side of things that, I don't know, it's really curious to me. I like those ideas. So anyway, Sean, thank you for coming on today, bright and early, and getting this going. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So, You're up in New York. Did you grow up like gardening and stuff? Or was this later in life you decided to jump in?
Well, a little bit of a mix. I actually grew up, I was born in Manhattan, and then my folks moved to suburban, quote unquote, northern New Jersey when I was a little kid. But it was a pretty densely populated area in Bergen County. So by all accounts, it was, not a farming community or growing community, but my mom, as a little kid, would just, it wasn't like she was being radical about it. I think it was more just being practical. She would put gardens everywhere on our little lot. It was like a 1/4 acre or smaller, standard lawn lot. And so there'd be sunflowers growing out of the cracks between the pavement, and zucchini sprawling all over. And so I had that exposure as a little kid, and that image stuck with me into adulthood for sure.
Nice. You ever get the neighbors calling, I don't know, somebody down on you? Sunflowers are too tall, or there's not enough lawn?
I think before
that time.
Yeah, I think people grumbled about it, but more than any, the people that we paid attention to were the folks. There was a couple that were from Sicily, and she was so thrilled that there were eggplants growing along the sidewalk that she could harvest to cook with. It's like reminded her of home. So the people that didn't like it, I guess they're not as interesting or as memorable as the people that did.
Yeah, nice,
So
nice.
yeah.
So, when did you end up in New York?
I mean, that I'll save you the whole long story, but I thought I thought I was on track to be doing stuff more with computers and graphics and 3D and blah, blah, blah. And then I shed that path in the early to mid 2000s and bought a very derelict and inexpensive property up in New York State near Ithaca in 2005 and started planting like a wild person there. And then, took me about 5 to 10 years to really start honing in and focusing what it was that I was trying to do and actually, learn about the ideas of permaculture and food forests and have these wrappers of concepts that other folks have developed and realized, I could refine and go better, go deeper with what I'm trying to do.
When you first started planting like a wild man there, did you have a plan? Did you have an idea? Were you just sticking stuff in the ground and seeing what would happen? How were you learning? How were you figuring things out? Or was it just, chance?
I think it was, and I think this is an important note to share because now that I've been doing it for 15 years, it seems, some of the videos that I put forward, we try to be really clear that we're always learning and figuring out as we go along. But in it might seem like I know what I'm doing, but the reality is, it is to some extent. Okay, I just got these 10 serviceberry for real cheap on clearance. Well, let me plant them over here and see what they do and hope for the best. And I think a little bit more than anything, when in doubt, it was about planting as though I was a creature, like an animal, like which is what I am, and not getting all stuck into the idea that I'm a human that's supposed to do things a certain way. And it's just like how squirrels will plant nuts. It seems pretty random, but maybe there's some intuition in there, and birds will poop out seeds and that turns into things. So why not also plant like that? And I've since learned there's some value in thinking things through a bit. The chestnut 2 feet from the house. Okay, that's
Yeah.
avoidable.
Yeah.
But to give yourself the latitude to start planting without saying it has to be the perfect, exactly right design, the grand master plan before anything happens, can really give paralysis to actually learning.
Yeah, it definitely can. I know I've been there. I think too, and I'm curious, I think it kind of can cut both ways sometimes because, like you said with the chestnut tree here, or like, kind of where we are, if I put up a goat pasture or would try to put up a few fruit trees in places. And then we decided that, that'd be a great place for a pasture later because it's, the way it sits and everything. So I think sometimes you can get like ahead of yourself and then realize like, oh man, I should have, at least thought a little bit through. And it can be tricky because I've definitely done both things where I'm like, man.
Yeah. And that leads me to a thing that I wanted to share is that I think if the way you get involved in perennial plants, like let's say, for example, apple tree, to use the chestnut example, if you are an end consumer of somebody else's growth of the chestnut, then every time you make those experiments or mistakes or what have you, it might cost you 10 or 12 or $25. And so then being that loose with it can be very, very costly. And so what I encourage folks, and this is a major, major drive with the whole channel, is to feel like it's worthwhile empowering yourself to learn how to grow plants from cuttings and from seeds and from divisions. And so then if you find a nice chestnut tree near where you live and you collect 100 nuts and you're able to grow 30 of them successfully, you can experiment. And if 25 of those ultimately have to be cut down because they were in the wrong spot, you're left with 5 chestnuts, and that might be all the nuts your family would ever need for the rest of your life. And it liberates you to really experiment and not feel like that was $1,000 mistake, that
Right.
kind of thing.
Yeah, that's something because oh man, where I am, people who listen would know this. I'm in Georgia on the fall line where it used to be the edge of the ocean, and so it's either sand or it's clay. And trying to get like trees to grow, fruit trees and stuff, it's just been really, really difficult. And we've lost a lot of them. So it's always just this experimenting and seeing what works and trying to figure it out. Something with going off of that chestnut analogy and collecting nuts and stuff like that. Are nut trees the same as fruit trees in that when I go to the store and I buy a pecan whip there, sometimes like the pear trees will be grafted. Are the nut trees the same, or are they like true to form or true to self there, where they'll actually look like a parent?
It's a mix. You can grow seedling pear trees, you can grow seedling chestnuts, and then there are also options of getting grafted. I think nut trees, by and large, are less often a grafted form, but there's certainly lots and lots of those options out there, and that goes down the road of a bit more advanced and a bit more costly, a little less DIY style. That's where you do want to spend the time and think through, like, okay,
Right.
that's $40. Let's figure out exactly where that's going to be.
Yeah. All right. So we'll go back now. And I'm curious, when you started planting, were you planting, was it like an annual garden type stuff, or did you just jump straight into perennials?
I've always had, so we grow both, Sasha and I grow both annuals and perennials, purely flowers and purely food and all the in-betweens. And but I would say my affinity has always been more in the realm of what is very, very hardy. We're in a colder climate here. We're not
Mm-hmm.
nearly as cold as some areas, but we're zone 5B, so we can get to -20, Fahrenheit or colder. Um, and the idea of plants that we can get food and medicine from that reliably come back no matter what the winter does has always been very compelling to me. And so that's definitely my number one focus. And as a nursery, that's exclusively what we offer, are cold hardy tested perennial plants.
Yeah. And I think we'll get into that, your nursery there that you guys have, because I know you have a bazillion plants that are on that list. And some of them I was kind of surprised to see them. I think 'cause I don't know if I wasn't aware that they could grow up that far north, or wasn't, I don't know, just surprised. So, when did you start doing that? When did you start selling trees or offering things out of a nursery?
Yeah, it wasn't what the plan was initially. It's not as though it's very divergent, but I wasn't going into planting all these different trees and, you know, fruits and those sorts of things with the idea of, ooh, that's how I'm going to make my living. Um, the story I normally share with folks, without making it a long one, is basically I planted so many different plants all over the place that they started to really encroach and make it hard to even get through pathways. And so I found myself at one point pulling out some raspberry plants just so I could simply
Mm-hmm.
get through a garden. And it was a few days later, I said, "Hey, do you ever sell plants?" And I was like, "Well, what are you looking for?" And they said raspberries. And it kind of made the connection that, yes, now I'm a nursery. And so it facilitates, okay, I want to always be collecting all these new plants and having them grow in these wild ways. And every fall and every spring now we go through and in a vaguely similar way, basically dig our way back to having paths and access, and then that's our inventory, and we figure out those excess quote unquote plants, how they can find new homes where they can become filling out landscape so much that those folks then have to dig them up and share them with folks.
And do you find that varieties matter when you're looking at more of a permaculture type thing? Does Are some varieties better suited to kind of filling voids and taking over space than other varieties of stuff? Or how specific do you have to be when you get there?
When you say variety, do you mean like species of plants or within a given species?
just overall general, like different species, like different, one raspberry is better than another, or, different, I don't know, blueberries are better at propagating or something. I don't know. I feel like I wonder sometimes if, because I go out in the woods, right? I go out in our field, and there's tons of blackberries. And so, we've done well with those wild bushes. But sometimes when I get, stuff from the store, it doesn't do so well and it doesn't spread as well. And so I was wondering if you found that some things are hardier or more inclined to spread than,
Yeah. There's to answer that question in a full way is it would be nearly impossible.
yeah.
There's just so much diversity of form. But yes, and what you mentioned, I think, is a really great point, that wherever you live, spending that time in the wild spaces or the less managed spaces, like what happens in the hedgerows next to the farm field, or what happens in the early forests after people stop brush hogging or mowing an area, and what are those cast of characters that are occupying and reclaiming that space, and what sort of analogs, like, are you either happy to say, hey, those blackberries we find in that field, they're spreading all over the place, let's just work with those, let's in the fall or the spring dig up some of the tip layers or the runners and bring that wild character back to our space because we know they work around here. Or a similar picture is, well, who else in the blackberry realm? Is it black cap raspberry? Is it, thornless blackberry? Different varietals within that particular species. So, you've seen the wild one do the best there. So are there analogs that are a little bit more cultivated and fancy that would also work? And that gets a little more questionable because, yeah, maybe the thornless blackberry is not as hardy, um, but that's a lot of what we do, is like, what's happening in the hedgerows, and how do we mimic those patterns of, oh, I see a grape, climbing up through a young maple tree. So can we plant uh, a, a certain like a seedless grape to climb up a walnut tree? Like, what are the patterns that we can mimic? But by and large, yeah, it's the plant types will tell you the picture of how readily they spread. It's the sugar maple isn't going to make a whole colony of itself, but a poplar tree will, and you can kind of see that in the wild and then interpret that for your own garden.
Yeah. So did you, when you started, how long did it take you to kind of figure that out, that paying attention to your natural surroundings and kind of mimicking that? When did that come into play in your system?
I think my whole life, and I'm just barely getting started. So it's just something to acknowledge the extremely high value of looking at. When I tend to drive very slowly or prefer to be a passenger, so I can just be seeing all this. There's just unlimited information that can come at you about what's happening with plants if you're interested in that.
Yeah. It's wild, like when you actually stop and pay attention. This is a total tangent, but like when my son was born, he has to carry him everywhere. He just liked to walk everywhere. So like, okay, let's figure out birds here. Birds are cool. Well, my son liked to scream a lot, so the birds would fly away. So I started getting into mushrooms and foraging for mushrooms. And like when you don't realize what is out there until you pay attention, whether it's, this little toadstool and all its relationships with the trees and the surrounding environments, or what it is. Like, you don't realize how interconnected everything it really is until you pay attention. It's I don't know, something I think everybody should just try to take note of their surroundings a little bit more, and I think you'd be amazed. But
yeah, there's not only do you learn so much, but it also helps to remind us that we're part of something that's pretty, that we're both a very small, we're smaller and less meaningful necessarily to the whole picture, but we're also part of it, and that there's just a lot of good emotional and mental health to be had from reminding yourself that you're part of something way, way bigger than you that is also not hidden. Like there's nothing secretive about people. I think ascribe the value of, the secret side of nature, but nature's very transparent. But it's up to you to actually focus your lens and quiet down and get into it.
Yeah, for sure. And that's what like it was like. And I had always been outside, I was just like an outdoors kid. And it wasn't until I really stopped and kind of thought about things again that I was just found even deeper into it. But so kind of curious, is there a difference between permaculture and a food forest?
Well, sure.
What would you say?
Yeah. So it's good to actually give something more meaningful than just these terms, right? So permaculture, it's almost a little cheesy to use it in a way because it's a name that was coined by someone back in the 70s or so. This fellow Bill Mollison from down in Tasmania, but it is, and he's just like I am, another white guy practicing something that has been practiced by indigenous folks and women and people of color across the globe for thousands and thousands of years. Like it's the people's idea of how to interact with nature. Basically, it's how do we look at the patterns and the interactions that are happening in nature and figure out how we can mimic them to meet our needs and do so in ways that are gentle enough that it actually can last a while, so it can be a permanent agriculture, something that not just sustainable, not just like, okay, how do we kind of keep it the way it is, but actually improve and regenerate and deepen resiliency and health for humans and then animals and then also plants and trees and the whole ecosystems around us. It encompasses a very wide range and it zooms all the way out to communities and things like that. So it's a big ethical framework, permaculture. And then a food forest is one of the many different valuable systems that you can work with within that ethics of permaculture to grow more food where you are. And that's, again, mimicking the hedgerows and the natural systems and saying, well, instead of a garden being 4 foot by 100 foot and exactly straight and all that, that's fine if that's what you want to do. But can you have apple trees that are in there that have your peas and cucumbers growing up into the apples? And can there be mints and sprawling perennial ground covers and cane fruit and currants and things that enjoy the shade of that apple? In other words, each, like three sisters with corn, beans, and squash, every plant has its aspects that it consumes and the aspects that it produces, and how can more perennial plants interact with all of that? So it can get very complex, but it's also basically saying, plant trees, vines, and shrubs all together.
All right. I like that. I like that it's and it's not something that you can just, I don't think that it is, but it's not something you can just let go, is it? I mean, like you do have to kind of pay some attention to these things, right? Like a food forest. Or can you just let it go willy-nilly and it will still do its thing?
Well, you can absolutely just let it go, but it will kind of do its thing, but its thing will probably almost certainly be different than what you would hope its thing would be.
Mm-hmm.
So I think permaculture as an overarching concept has gotten the wrong picture attached to it. There's a phrase, or there's like a catchphrase that people use saying the designer is the recliner, as in, if you make a perfect permaculture design and the perfect system, you set it in motion and then ... you come back and there's just food prepared for you in bowls all over the place. And it really is a constant push and pull and interaction. At least maybe I'm doing it wrong, but I've only found that I constantly have to kind of cut things back and manage and this and that. But I'm not coming in with irrigation or fertilizer or tillage or all of the intense toil and struggle that a lot of agricultural systems have. It's mainly that I'm coming in and kind of pruning my way through the overabundance of these diverse perennial plants so that I can harvest what I'm looking for. And they're all producing mulch and fertility and soil protection for each other. And they're all there and bigger the next year. It's just a bit more wild.
Yeah. That makes sense. That's what I would imagine. So I know we mentioned it briefly, but you have your nursery. How much do you guys move? Do you move a lot of trees? Do you move a lot of product?
Yeah, well, the thing is we've reached our the ceiling of our limiting factor, and that's another idea with permaculture, is the concept of limiting factor, which in our modern society almost never applies to like a capitalist picture. So we're a business, and our ceiling is that for the two of us, we can't really keep up with the demand that there is for the plant. So we open up for sales in the fall and then again in the spring. And I think because of the number of folks that are excited about what we do on YouTube, or that those different social venues, that anything we can grow and anything we can sell seems to sell out, and it's amazing. And also, like, okay, cool, that our business is at the biggest it's going to be. What we don't want to do is start going down the route of like, well, let's expand and get more land and start growing at a bigger scale. I think the ethics start to shed when you scale up a business. But yeah, it's pretty wonderful. It's many hundreds, if not thousands, of trees and shrubs, and hardy perennial foods and medicines leave our little dingy garage each fall and spring and land all across the US. And then hopefully people get the plants and never order those plants from us again. And wherever they live, they figure out how to take cuttings from currants and share them or sell them with neighbors, and like take seeds from Turkish rocket and sow them in a wild public space. So there's more perennial broccoli growing for people, and refilling the landscape with food wherever they are.
Yeah. It's wild how much like downtown, they just put in a new little, like, I don't know, community place, and there's a couple of big sidewalks, and there's a little fountain kind of water thing, and they did put some rosemary in.
That's good. Yeah.
But like, there's all these other plants that who knows how much they paid for them to put them in, and maybe they look good, but like, there's so many other things out there that you could have put in there that would have had this other beneficial use to people, and it's I don't know if people don't realize what's out there, or if it's just something that nobody thinks twice about, or what. But it's I don't know. I always see manicured like landscape that is just looks good, and I'm like, man, you could totally do something else with that. It would look good and taste good too. But
I don't know that I can get my head around where the thinking is. I see it, the same thing you just described, over and over again, where there's a new space that is converted over, and it's planted. At least it's planted around here. It's not like all concrete, but it's always or very often with the bleached or the painted mulches, and it's, even if there were elements that were technically edible, you'd be hard pressed to want to eat them because of all the weird stuff that's in there. It's something that we all need to decide that we need to be vocal about and shed, is that there's this picture in our society that food is something that happens away from us, and then it comes to us and we buy it, and it's in a package, or it's at the restaurant. And the idea of the food being something that actually is right where we live and right on the trees as we walk by, there's something like societally embarrassing or wrong or dirty about that, maybe.
Yeah.
And I think all it takes is more and more people putting food right where they live, and as people walk by, they can see you eating the raspberries right off of the plant, or picking apples from your yard and sharing with them, and reminding people, because I don't think it's that buried that deep in. It just needs to be people seeing more examples of it, that food can be where you actually are, not shipped from California by folks that don't have good working conditions, or all over the globe. And Um, I I don't know. I think we have the right to actually plant food in public spaces, just like a squirrel does and just like a bird does. So maybe that park gets some currant cuttings this fall. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's it, right? I mean, like you have all these places, and I think some people more and more are putting things out there. And it's a weird sensation when you're out, foraging for things sometimes. And because I remember in New York, I used to stop and take some asparagus. Yeah. They used to grow all over on the sides of the road. And we actually dug some up for a little while and planted it back at our house. And, my parents have a nice asparagus bed now, but it seems so strange and so like you said, almost dirty, or there's something about it. There's this stigma around like free food or something that it's like, no, this is what's good. This is what's like local and right and healthier for you. But anyway,
Yeah.
so your website there, edileacres.org. You guys are on YouTube. You have all your trees listed on there. If I went to order something from you, I'm down here in Georgia. Are there things on there that if I try to order, you'd be like, I don't know if this is such a good idea for you down there. It might be needs a little more cold, or do you give people any suggestions and stuff like that?
That's sometimes that's a little harder for us. What I try to do is be very clear that for any folks that are in similar climates to ours, I can share notes for days, and
Right.
because that's what we have. But anything other than our climate, it's really about what I would encourage is, well, first do some research. Does it feel like it's reasonable in your warmer climate as a foundation, and then get a tiny bit of that plant and see what it does for you. And if it does okay, so a lot of times what we'll do, like we ordered as an example, Miyoga ginger, which is a pretty neat perennial ginger that wasn't supposed to be hardy for our area. And so when I first got it, it was expensive and I coddled it. I put it in a high tunnel and was very, very careful. We watered it, kept it labeled and all that. When it proved that, okay, it can do that, how do we divide it? How do we expand it? And we did that a little bit. And then we put it in a few spots, partial shade, full sun, wetter spot, drier spot. It worked in all of those. Okay. You learn, if you can get a little bit of a plant at first and then learn to propagate it, you can experiment and within 2 or 3 years have extensive notes to share with others about what that plant can do where you live. And you can be a valuable resource of both information and also plant genetics for your community. And that's something we've come to, is that the last thing I would ever want to do as a permaculture nursery is try to hoard the attention or interest in the plants we grow and say, well, we're sold out of chestnuts, or we're sold out of persimmons. Wait till next year and then order persimmons from us. Instead, I'd say, so like on our website, if you go to the purchase page, we're sold out of almost everything right now. And
Yeah.
so what I'd encourage people to do, there's a link there that actually lists a whole bunch of other nurseries that grow awesome plants. And so, for example, there's Silver Run Forest Farm that's down in Harrisonburg, Virginia. And those would be folks that I'd encourage you to check out, because you're in Georgia, the plants they have are gonna be way closer and more appropriate to your region. And so that's the deal, is like, who has ethical, small scale perennial nurseries that are ideally bike riding distance, but at least a few hours drive or in a similar region to you. And for anyone listening to this, maybe you're the permaculture nursery of the future for the community that's within an hour's drive of where you live. And you can start mapping out the plants that do incredibly well for your county in eastern Oklahoma or northern California or wherever you may live,
Yeah. Yeah. I think, that's a big thing. I think when you think local and really, like, we said, what do I see in nature? What's growing around here? And as much as I want to get a bunch of sugar maples going down here, it's probably not a good idea, and really, it's like, I don't know. saving vegetable seeds and stuff. The stuff that grows in your local region that's saved from that area is probably going to grow a lot better than something you get from half the country away, and saved from a totally different climate. And I think it's the same thing with perennials. A couple things before I let you go. I know you don't just sell your as a nursery. You do offer some other stuff there. Maybe you want to talk about that real quick and tell us where to go find you on YouTube or anything else you want to tell us about.
Well, chances are you'll probably stumble across Edile Acres on YouTube if you search for like chicken composting or sees, cheap greenhouses, that kind of thing. But yeah, you could go on YouTube, Edile Acres. If you search for us, you'll find the channel, and we encourage you to check it out and subscribe if you like it. That community has been growing a lot. It's pretty wonderful how robust and rich the comment sections are. Like, it's one of the few channels I've found where it's just like everyone's polite and thoughtful, and I learned so much from all the ideas that people put out. So thank you everyone who does that. And yeah, I mean, we do consultation and that kind of thing, or remote support to folks, but so people can find that out on the website. And I guess one other thing would be, if you're interested in the concept of permaculture and finding community or having really like rich, deep conversations about these different topics, there's a website called Permies.com. And the person who put it together, I'm not an absolute huge fan of, but the community that is there, the forums, the discussion quality is incredibly great. And so if you're interested in guilds around a black walnut or waterways and how to seal ponds with pigs and all these different fun, going deep dive stuff with permaculture concepts, Permies.com has been a really great resource, I thought.
I'll see if I can remember to put that in the show notes. I should. I'll write that down right now. But all right, man, I appreciate your time, and yeah, best of luck to you. I love the ideas and what you're doing. It's needs to be more of that happening all over the place. So,
well, thank you. And this has been a lovely interview. You've got a great style and a lot of wonderful questions, and it felt like a very comfortable and rich conversation. It was rewarding for me. So thank you.
Not a problem, man. All right, you guys, back. I hope you guys enjoyed that conversation. It was an early morning conversation, so it took me a little bit to kind of wake up, but you do what you gotta do. And thank you guys for coming back, for checking in for the first time. Either way, I appreciate your little ear holes. Go leave a review on iTunes, hit the subscribe button, send me an email, homesteadsandhomeschools@gmail.com. Let me know what you think. I said it at the end of the last show, and I'll say it again. I want to do something with this show. I want to expand it, help it mature, help it grow, do something to it. I don't know. I feel like it wants to do something. It needs to do something. And I'm open to suggestions of what that may be. Anyway, if you have ideas for guests, I'm open to that as well. So, yeah, let me know. I like feedback. Feedback is good, right? How are you supposed to grow without feedback? Anyway, guys, like I said, I appreciate it. Get out there, go do something good. Go be nice to people. Go grow something. Go educate your children. Go do something positive. And come back next week after you've gone out there, sowing those seeds of liberty, so we can all reap seeds of freedom together.